Yeah, welcome. My name is Kurt. I'm the Executive Director, Transform Finance. I'm really excited for this conversation today. We have a really great slate of speakers. We're going to be talking about developing funds in the space of community-owned real estate. And we'll talk all about, what that is, framing this conversation and why these funds are so important. Some quick housekeeping. Here's kind of the Zoom setup we have. Please use the chat as much as you want. We'll use that as a way of taking questions. And feel free to respond to each other. We'd love to have active dialogue. If you need or want closed captions, sometimes it's in the more section of the Zoom menu. Sometimes it just is right there with the CC. So you can find that, at the bottom. Sophie, our operations manager, is in the chat as well, so you can always send her or the speakers a Slack if you're having any technological issues. But hopefully, this will be one of the few times where we're pretty clean on that front. So for those of you who are new to Transform Finance or just want a refresher or want to know, hey, why is Transform Finance talking about this? So we're a nonprofit organization that creates insights, connections, and actionable strategies for all of the many stakeholders who are challenging legacy investment approaches and seeding new transformative investment models. And across all that work, we have three principles, which are up on the screen here, that those affected by investments have the chance to design the outcomes, govern the processes, and share in the ownership of those investments. Investors should add more value than what they extract as returns, and risk and returns should be fairly allocated among all stakeholders. And those are themes that will definitely show up today when we're talking about the funds who we have presenting today. Recently, as many of you know, a big focus of our work has been shifting wealth and control in the economy so that it benefits a broader set of stakeholders. You might be familiar with our alternative ownership enterprise and employee ownership work. And this is definitely in the same, I would say, umbrella field of shared ownership, talking about the real estate context. And I'm really excited to really share this because this is something that we've been working on for a while. And this is kind of our first, big public event where we're going to be talking about this in a long time. So yeah, really excited to kick off this journey with all of you, really. So today, what we're going to be covering is I'm going to do a quick bird's eye view of the community-owned real estate field, just getting some key concepts and ideas in mind that help, kind of ground the conversation. We're going to hear from three funds, the one created by Grounding Solutions Network, by Right to the City, and by Integrated Community Solutions, who are all working in very different contexts and working with different models, but all are trying to create more investment capital for community-owned real estate investments. So really excited to have these three really awesome folks on the webinar today. We're going to do kind of a short conversation amongst all the speakers, but then quickly get to the Q&A with the audience where we answer your questions. We'll kind of open that up where we have the whole, the whole Zoom screen. Would love it if you come off video if you can during that time, because yeah, we love to, feel like we're in a room together. And then as a bonus, talk to the speakers. We can all stick around for around 15 minutes after the top of the hour. So if you have extra questions or just want to have an informal chat, meet some folks in the room, we'll be making space for that too. So if you have the time, would love you to hang out with us after the official webinar. So what is community-owned real estate, which conveniently has this acronym of CORE? And I have to shout out Inclusive Action for the City, which is in Los Angeles, doing really awesome work with communities and taking properties off the market and having this community-controlled approach to real estate development. They have a program called Community Owned Real Estate. And rather than create a new term, I asked Rudy over there if it was okay to use this for the webinar. He's like, heck yeah. So that's the term we're going to be using for this. What we mean by it is kind of a broad sense of real estate development projects that include a strong aspect of community governance and or equity ownership in the project. So could have just this like wealth building, asset ownership opportunities, or could have this governance and control element. And many projects have mixes of both. And so it's important to kind of cover like what do we mean by that. So in this next slide, I have this is a screenshot from a report that came out recently from the Assemble 100 gathering, which was a kind of big, multi-asset class event, and then they produced this report around shared ownership and just ownership generally. And this specific piece is actually taken from Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program and their New Wealth Agenda. So highly recommend folks check that out to learn more, more context around, why ownership and wealth is kind of becoming more and more of a strategy for funders, field builders, impact investors. But in terms of the wealth piece, it's really important to consider all these factors that are boosted when people, especially people who have historically not have access to wealth building and asset building opportunities to really own, their homes, pieces of their communities, their workplace. You have all these pieces like resilience, more economic mobility, the creation of intergenerational wealth that can get passed on to kids and future generations, and all of the quality of life benefits that come with having, that access to an asset that really appreciates. And the fifth one here is agency and voice, which at Transform Finance we always find super, super important. So I actually have, the next piece on that, which is another really big benefit of ownership, especially when we have community ownership, which shows up in this context of real estate, because real estate is place-based, right? We're thinking of housing buildings, we're thinking of commercial real estate lots that bring economic activity to a community. We're thinking of land and land ownership. Owning land and real estate actually gives an opportunity for power and agency for the communities who are making those decisions. So here I have a photo from the East New York Community Land Trust, which is actually right near where I am on the border of Brooklyn and Queens, New York City. In that the East New York CLT is doing a super bottom-up approach, organizing tenants, acquiring buildings, and using the community land trust nonprofit as a kind of like an anchor for broader organizing and political power building. And that's something that we see in a lot of community-owned real estate projects where they become an anchor for leverage within local political and broader community dynamics. They can be places for families, activists, organizations, business owners, to convene and enrich the community. When they control the land, they're able to bargain, and work with local politicians to create regulatory changes, and help strengthen the community by having this base that is not just the typical landlord, external investor, financed property, but actually the folks using the buildings, living in the buildings, are making the decisions. Like we see that as real power that merges and meshes really nicely with community organizing and broader political activity. And this all really helps to shape individuals who participate in the processes as well. Those of you who remember or are still engaging with us around our work with participatory investing, like looking at funds and other kind of projects where communities are deciding where capital is moving in their communities, will remember how important in the different facets of power in place-based capital. So some quick notes on this landscape of projects that we are looking at today. I think it's important to flag one, the different contexts that they emerge in. It's not just one monolithic, model or strategy that is replicated. These projects are happening in the housing space, commercial real estate, land. You can think of land back and rematriation efforts. These projects have a real range of goals. Some have communities seeking power and control over, how their landscape is developed. That could be an anti-displacement measure, preventing gentrification, taking properties off the market, and deciding who comes in, what businesses and what is affordable to new folks moving into the community. Or that could also be around this wealth building and individual wealth building idea where communities have ownership opportunities for an asset that appreciates. They can invest in the property that grows in value over time. They might get a dividend from those investments. And then a piece that I find really important to note, and I would also flag for the researchers in the room, is that a lot of these projects, just in not having this traditional, external investor, big real estate developer led project actually prevents a lot of extraction of wealth from communities. So I often am interested in that question of what would happen if this project was happening not in a community owned or a community led way. What wealth is not being extracted? It's not just looking at the wealth accumulated to communities. It's saying what would that alternative have been? And if you look at what's been happening with private equity in the real estate space, we know that there's a lot of extraction happening in this industry. And then lastly, it's an important point here. There's a diversity of models. Some of you may have heard of community land trusts. It's kind of a long-standing model of community ownership. But there's a lot of really innovative models using purpose trusts, cooperative structures. There's the community investment trusts piloted in East Portland. There's tenant equity models. We're not going to be able to get into the nitty-gritty of defining all of these different models today. But what is important, and I want you to leave with, and it's on the next slide here, is that this heterogeneity reflects that the model doesn't predicate the goal of the project. Within a specific model, you have a CLT, you have a perpetual purpose trust that's owning buildings. There's flexibility and different ways of going about doing those kinds of ownership projects that get to some of those different goals. It could be wealth building, could be more community control, anti-displacement. So it's hard to cut and paste some of these models from one community to another because each community and geography is so context specific, has different aspects. Here we mentioned that a lot of ecosystems are much better organized. There's more CDFI lenders, community foundations. There's more nonprofit organizations playing that quarterback role. So different regions have different, blends of actors, and that creates kind of unique manifestations of these different projects. So there's a lot to get into there in terms of the kinds of projects and different models here. But today we're really talking about financing, right? We have funds who are going to be sharing their experience creating funds and financing these projects on the ground. What is important from my perspective to frame that conversation with is just how how variant the financing infrastructure is place by place. Some communities are more able to raise money from traditional philanthropy. Some might even have angel investors or wealthy individuals, especially in coastal, more resource cities. But others, are really scrappy in terms of how they're putting together capital stacks for these deals, whether it's one-off building that's converting to community ownership, or whether it's the construction of a new shopping mall that has a bunch of businesses that are going to move in and occupy this space. There's really no one size fits all here. And sadly, for now, there's not a ton of national financing infrastructure in place to support the work happening at the ground level. And a lot of folks, some of you, in this room, are thinking about, how do we develop that infrastructure? But because the field's pretty early stage in terms of calling itself a field, at least, a lot of these things are getting built. So there's a lot of opportunity for experimenting with new and interesting financing models, new products, new vehicles, and a lot of opportunity to share experience across practitioners who are actually developing these projects. So today we're going to be asking some of those important questions. Why do we need funds? How do we get capital to these communities? Thinking about the different kinds of organizations and institutions that are present there. And really, what are the needs of the funds who are stepping in to develop portfolios of community-owned real estate properties? So that concludes my portion here. So I'm actually going to cut my screen share, and we're going to hear from three really innovative funds who are led by folks who have been doing this work for a while. And like I said, at the end here, we're going to have a lot of opportunities for questions. Please keep them coming in the chat. But first, I want you all to get a full sense from our speakers on, what are their funds, what are they doing, how do they operate, and how are they bringing change to the communities they're serving. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Devin Culbertson of Grounded Solutions Network, who is going to explain what they're doing in this fund context.
Thanks, Kurt, and thanks y'all for joining and taking a few minutes to hear about the work, and excited for the conversation to come. So I'm Devin Culbertson, and I'm VP of Innovative Finance here at Grounded Solutions Network. I come to this work as history as a developer doing single-family and multifamily work, as a LIHTC syndicator, spent some time at CDFI and doing national program work, and really am in this space now, thinking about the Grounded Solutions Network of 250 members across the country, and what those organizations need to bring these community ownership concepts to their communities. So for each of those organizations, they're thinking about balancing long-term affordability, the wealth creation potential that Kurt talked about, and also different elements of community control over different structures. But what all of them are facing is this mismatch of a growing need in their community, and shrinking public resources at different rates depending on kind of what they're trying to achieve. And so, from the Grounded Solutions perspective, as kind of the member umbrella organization for all these groups struggling in different ways, we set out to really identify a strategy that might work in multiple places, and that would really allow us to bring some staff capacity, some strategy, some national partnerships, and a capital infrastructure, so that it wasn't a matter of each of those folks trying to recreate something boutique in each place. There was a way that they could kind of tap into something shared. And so what we came up with was the Homes for the Future initiative, and that really has sort of three pieces. The first is really just thinking about what that is, what the strategy ought to be. And so the clear and obvious opportunity for us was looking at the shift in the single family rental space. So over the course of 10 or 15 years, that landscape has dramatically changed. There's been a lot more investment activity, and there's been a lot more scaled investment activity, which has brought with it an infrastructure for buying, rehabbing, and holding single family homes cost effectively in a way that you just really couldn't do before. It was much more of a mom and pop industry. The costs were really burdensome, and it was hard to hold single family homes as rentals over the long term and make a significant return. And that really changed with a lot of these investors and the groups that service them. So we really wanted to sort of kind of solve one problem with the other, and look at this need and this thirst for ways to grow portfolios without the reliance on public subsidy, and use some of this growing infrastructure as kind of an antidote for that. And so the Homes for the Future structure that we came up with was to partner actually with some of these larger operators that were built to service institutional capital cost effectively, and instead use impact capital to activate them. And so our model goes in and acquires single family homes. Sometimes that can be on a portfolio basis. Sometimes those are small portfolios or even individual homes on the market. We partner with that operator to rehab and act as our property manager day to day. and then hold them for a period of up to 10 years in some cases. And what that allows us to do is amortize the capital that we acquired with. But particularly in the markets where we're focused, there's also an increase in incomes over time. And so we're really focused on places where the economy is strong, where we're seeing growth in incomes and therefore purchasing power. And on the back end, we can sell at a price that's affordable to folks given those growing incomes and still repay our investors at the outset. So that first piece is that national strategy to put that together, identify those partners, look for portfolio opportunities. The second piece is really the fun piece, which we can unpack a little bit more today, and that's really sort of the aggregation tool for the impact capital that gives us the opportunity to invest in those local portfolios and in the places where we're focused, and also to be a little bit flexible and creative in how those things come together. We have an idea of how this could work that we're exploring and mobilizing, but sometimes we have to be a little bit adaptive to context or opportunities, and that's been successful for us in moving some things forward. And then the last piece is really the place-based portfolios themselves, and that is where we're looking at the city by city level, understanding what the landscape of shared equity operators are and what they need to grow their portfolios over time. We're collaborating with them on a buy box and an acquisition criteria set to buy those homes. Importantly, that's also where we're borrowing capital to leverage some of the senior debt on that real estate, but also provide a pathway for local investors who like the concept but are really want to make sure that their investment is place-based and keep their resources in their community. So there's that third structure to allow them to invest there. And so when we pull those together, we've got a strategy that we've been rolling out. We've been aggregating some capital at that national level. We've now made 2 investments, one in Minneapolis in September, and now we've made a commitment to invest in Atlanta, and that will close this summer. We'll start acquisitions there. So that's generally the structure of what we're working on. I think we can get into kind of why the fund structure and kind of returns and capital types a little bit, but we just wanted to kind of give a broad strokes introduction of what we've been working on.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Devin. And I posted in the chat if folks have questions for any of the individual speakers or just generally, if you post them in the chat, I'll keep track of them and we'll get to those in the Q&A section. Or we can just give you an opportunity to raise your hand and say it aloud too. So next, I'm gonna have Fernando come up and talk about the fund that they're working on at Right to the City.
Awesome. Thanks, Kurt. Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, I guess depending where you're all at. My name is Fernando Fer, and I am the Associate Director of Capital Strategies for the Right to the City Alliance. We're an alliance of over 60 organizational member groups spread across the United States that are doing local housing justice and land justice work with the aim to stabilize neighborhoods by fighting for community control of land and housing. Our orientation as an alliance is that change happens locally and regionally. I think as many folks here would agree, through base building and creating opportunities for community residents to feel empowered, which is why we focus on rent control as a central issue back in 2017 and 2018. Our members assessed then, as many do now, that fighting against corporate landlords and slumlords at a minimum could lead to residents winning disputes for repairs for their homes, but potentially and optimistically could create opportunities for them to take control over the buildings themselves, and in that process, take control over their housing, community control. The idea of the loan fund was born a few years later after that, as more of our groups began to explore the idea of acquiring buildings that they were already organizing in. But the first barrier that many faced was obviously access to capital. Our member organizations are grassroots-based building organizations. They're not developers, nor do they come from finance. So the idea of creating a revolving loan fund that could catalyze our members' projects to secure additional funds for these acquisitions was born from there. And our fund is specific that, it's for our members specifically, right? That's our, we're an alliance and it's specific in that way that makes our fund a little bit unique in that sense, I suppose. But our loan fund was created to provide our member groups with non-extractive and patient capital for investments around acquisitions, bridge loans, refinancing, and rehab work. And through the investments we're providing to our member projects, where there's a history of organizing, we're not only preserving the limited affordable housing that is left in our communities, we're also creating power and stability for residents who are building the structures like community land trusts and cooperatives to make collective decisions to govern over their homes. A big part of the creation of this fund for us is about autonomy and stability. Another big piece is to create vehicles for investments to move from extractive industries to more regenerative ones that make a direct impact in people's lives and ensure their well-being as well as the collective whole as well. We look at the Just Transition framework as a resource to help guide our objective to shift the housing market from one that is premised on speculation and profit to one that centers people and their well-being. And these things take a long time. And I think many folks here, I think folks on the panel would know, it took us about 4 years to really get the fund up and running structurally. But we opened the first cycle in spring of 2023. And since then, we've had the opportunity to move and commit 3 million to member projects in the Midwest. And have supported other member projects through investments from peers in our networks, which get that number closer to 4 million. To date, our fund has supported 2 projects, one in the city of Minneapolis, another one in Denver, and impact totaling 148 units that we have managed to preserve and keep affordable. This is only the beginning for us, but we're very proud of the work that we're doing with our members and the direct impact that it's having on people's lives. Providing that long-term patient capital opens up so many opportunities for families in our communities, and it's readily easy to see. But I think as folks on this panel again would also agree, there's so many challenges with this work to making sure that the strategies are sustainable and sustainable for the long run. Our members, again, a lot of them are doing this for the first time, or they have only a couple of projects under their belt. And for us, it's really important that we get the lowest type of investment possible, the cheapest type of investment possible in order to not burden our members and to make their project sustainable. We want to make capital, patient and as long-term as we possibly can in order to create the flexibility for them to really be able to get creative and to build out the structures that they need in order to be good stewards for these projects, right? We also need grant capital, right? Investment capital is one thing, but we also need grant capital, for our members to be able to develop the TA to, again, be able to be good stewards and support the community in developing these structures, and to eventually grow different cooperative, out of one create others, and create an infrastructure, that can support that ecosystem, and again, at the end of the day, community. And the other really important thing for us is also we need grants for our operations as well, right? Like we don't want to like tax on and add an extra percentage point on on the loans that we're providing our members, in order for us to be up and running and be operational, right? So that's another key piece that we're beginning to think about. How do we creative about raising more grant capital for our own infrastructure so that we can keep that investment as low as we possibly can. Again, at the end of the day, we're trying to keep the rents as low as we possibly can, right? And meet those needs of our folks in that way. So we're getting creative. We're redefining what it is to make an impact in our communities through capital investments and finance. We're also, working to redefine risk in order to really support the most marginalized and the folks that need, these opportunities, right? And for folks to have an opportunity at a dignified future through housing security. At the end of the day, I think that's the most important thing, and that's really what's at stake here for us. So I'll wrap it there, and I'll pass it over back to Kurt.
Yeah, thanks, Fer. Yeah, excited to dig more into your model too during some of the questions that we have. So Paul, why don't you wrap us up here? You do have some slides, so I'm gonna go ahead and share that, and then yeah, go right ahead.
Great. Thank you, Kurt, and thank you to Transform Finance for doubling down on shared ownership. At the end of the day, low-income people need to own things, build assets through ownership, and really appreciate Transform Finance putting a spotlight on these strategies. I am Paul Bradley. I am the founder and former CEO of Rock USA. and I'm the current CEO of Integrity Community Solutions. Next slide. Rock USA and ICS are both singularly focused on the manufactured housing community sector. That is the 3 million US homeowners that own a home on rented land in one of 43,000 mobile home parks or manufactured home communities. Next slide. Over the last 40 years, Rock USA and our predecessor, the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund in New Hampshire, from which I hail many years ago, have helped 340 co-ops purchase their communities, securing 24,000 home sites in 21 states. With my transition to ICS and Emily Thaden, my successor at Rock USA, employment at Rock USA as its new CEO, we have embarked on a two-path strategy to accelerate the growth of resident ownership. The first is through Rock USA and Emily's leadership and the team that has been responding to homeowner demand, but now to much greater public interest in preserving mobile home parks. This is not how it's always been. It has been an uphill battle from 1984 to make manufactured housing and mobile homes a recognized source of good quality, affordable housing when it is properly secure. But that trend has turned, and we can expect at a minimum, I think, without putting too much pressure on Emily, another 7,000 home sites preserved by the end of the decade through Rock USA's continued work as a TA provider with a network of TA providers and a CDFI, Rock USA Capital. Next slide. Integrity Community Solutions comes into this as a wholly owned subsidiary with the goal of acquiring value add or but-for properties that have vacant sites or can be expanded. And our objective here is to own them on an interim basis, 3 to 7 years, and exit to a resident-owned community at the end of that. And by the middle part of the 2030s is to be on the path to preserving 5,000 home sites per year, more than 2x the most productive year we've ever had. And generally speaking, probably 3 or 4x our going average of new co-ops coming into the network. Next slide. Our first project at ICS is up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. It's Sonora, California. $450,000 median house price. This property was 70% vacant when we bought it in January. Our goal is 100% owner occupied, 100% filled and owner occupied within 5 years. In that process, we will add about $150,000 of net operating income and deliver and sell 30 or so new factory-built homes, fire resistant and Energy Star rated. That infill and expansion work represents about a $2.5 million quote value add. And it is in that addition of NOI, that value added to the real estate, where we can both make capital improvements, generate a small profit at ICS, and ideally offer the residents, the community, at a discount at the end of our investment period. Next slide. So we're in a process right now with generating a $30 million warehouse where we'll purchase 5 to 7 properties, roughly 400 home sites, and sell somewhere in the tune of 100 plus homes. And then we're going to roll that warehouse into our first social impact equity fund and size to acquire 5,000 home sites and place 1,000 or more new units. And the ultimate impact investment opportunity here, because this is the ultimate impact investment opportunity, because the exit is where the security is landed for in perpetuity, forever. And the co-op will take ownership at the end of our investment period. And with that, I'll close and we'll get to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul, Devin, and Fernando for telling us a little bit more about your funds. So I have a few questions that I think would be really interesting to get all of your takes on. That we had a really great prep call conversation, so I'm hoping to continue that kind of spirit. So the first question is for the type of community-owned real estate that each of you are supporting, and I think the type of ownership is definitely different in each case. Why is a fund necessary for capitalizing these deals? What does that gain you as opposed to just financing some of these deals one at a time? And are there any limitations, especially if you're thinking from the perspective of a perspective of LP? What would they need to know about this kind of support for community-owned real estate as opposed to some of these one-off projects? And whoever wants to jump in first can go right ahead.
I'll jump in first, Kurt. For Integrity Community Solutions, a fund is essential. First off, recognize funds give you prospective capital that you can go into the marketplace and fund your acquisitions. The manufactured housing community sector has been consolidated pretty significantly since 08, and really it's the history of the sector, increasing consolidation by REITs. Private equity of every size now is in the market. So we see more and more, and roughly half of the communities every year are sold not as individual assets, but in portfolios of communities. The infamous Frank Rolfe, who some people know from the John Oliver episode, and Mobile Home University, half of their portfolio was sold a couple years ago, 95 properties, mid 300 million. And they all sold in a single day. The fellow who bought them has been in the business half as long as me. And he did in one day what's taken us a decade to do. So we really need, in order to belly up to that bar and buy portfolios, you really need prospective capital. You can't be chasing capital and competing against the private equity players that are at that table. So that's our ambition. We want to get to acquiring portfolios. And for LP investors, they're going to see our warehouse and they're going to see the performance of our warehouse in order to determine whether to come into the fund or not.
Yeah, I might follow that because as are somewhat similar in that the nature of trying to buy single family homes, single family rentals, even single family portfolios is that they are the expectation of that market is so different from commercial real estate or community development finance in ways that our traditional structure in the community development space, the affordable housing space, of having a pipeline of deals and making individual deal-based investments and seeing our capital stack one deal at a time, is just not effective in spaces that move really quickly, which is why you've seen a lot of land acquisition funds for TOD sites and things like that, where things move quickly. The same is true in the single family home space. So if folks want to see closing in 30, maybe 45 days. For large portfolios that have some challenges, you can tie them up for longer and try and aggregate capital, but it really is not terribly effective. And so to really be in that single family rental space and preserve single family homes in the neighborhoods that we're focused on, you've got to have capital pre-aggregated and ready to go. And similarly, because that is the structure of private equity, where there's already capital in place, the infrastructure that's built to serve that capital and buy single family homes and rent them is set up for capital to be pre-aggregated. So you can't activate that infrastructure, you can't leverage that infrastructure unless you have the capital to sign an agreement at scale.
Yeah, for us, it's interesting. I think we depend on our members and our members depend on us, and it's like that mutual relationship that we have, right? Where I think the projects that we're looking at in our waterway, the projects won't pencil out unless like there's a level of significant like public investment coming into those projects in the first place, right? And the reason why the projects that we're looking at are even in that position is because our members have organized and changed policy locally to create, whether it's, capital or whether to move a city to, provide land, for free, for example, right? But the public sector takes a significant hit in that capital stack, at least at the bottom of it, right? But then even with that, investors are still very hesitant to come into a deal, right? In terms of like where is the financing coming from? And that's where I think our fund comes in, right? As that like I guess it's risky from the sense of like we're like the first coming in and taking on, but we're a percentage of the entire capital stack, but it allows for other people to feel more comfortable in coming in. And where we can, we try to negotiate to not take on the bulk of the risk as well, right? Because we're also an emergent fund and we can't do that, which are different types of negotiations. But that's kind of like that's kind of how we fit in like the importance of us, right? It's kind of like creating a level of security for other investors, even traditional investors, to come into the deal and feel enticed to come and invest where they probably wouldn't have done it before.
Yeah, what I'm picking up here is just how each of these funds are filling different roles in the the capital stacks of the deals that they are participating in. Very targeted and have specific gaps that this capital market infrastructure is so ill-equipped to finance. And it gets to this question of what is kind of like the goal of each of your funds. If we talk about success for the models that you're trying to propose, in 5-10 years, if you raise the right kind of capital, you're able to demonstrate this sort of transaction in each of your different contexts. What does success look like, and how do you kind of see that transforming potentially the broader impact real estate investment ecosystem, and maybe even real estate investment beyond that impact segment? I'll let anyone jump in first.
I'm happy to jump in, Kurt. I think for me personally, first, some context. The excessive demand for manufactured home communities brought on by ever increasing amounts of private equity flowing into this market has meant that individual co-op purchases by Rock USA and its network, by and large, include some level of public subsidy, whether it's for the purchase or the improvements right out of the gates. That's just, to Fernando's point, the goal being to maintain some level of affordability in these communities while removing them from the speculative real estate market. So hence Emily's leadership and strong background in public policy and public-private partnerships, really excellent for Rock USA where it's at right now and where it's going. I'm fascinated taking a more market-oriented approach. And look, my neck's way outside of my shirt collar on this, but I will consider it an enormous success if we can transition some of ICS's portfolio to the residents at an affordable price that doesn't pull on public resources. In other words, leverages that value add and provides a sufficient level of discount so that the homeowners can purchase it and maintain the affordability. We got to prove that, but that's what I'm out to try to do.
Yeah, I guess we can keep the same batting order here. I'd say for us, ultimately the goal in acquiring these homes is to take homes off that speculative market, particularly in places where there's a dwindling supply of low-cost homes in strong neighborhoods, and transition them ultimately into our members or similar organizations that are focused on shared equity. That may be an ownership structure, and in some cases it might be a rental portion of their portfolio, but ultimately preserving those assets over time. So it really is sort of an asset-based and place-based focus that will continue to serve the needs of the people who live there with the spectrum of housing choices, right? So that's sort of the goal in the work that we're doing. I think in the fund piece, it really is about finding this path to maturing our scale and capital structure so that our returns can sort of get to a scale that broadens out a little bit and allows for a broader investor base. Right now, a lot of the capital that we're relying on really is in that PRI range for that subordinate piece, for that equity tier. And we see a pretty clear trajectory to getting that much more into the low end of market, market considering the risk, sort of a spectrum. So getting to that place and being able to provide those stronger capital returns is part of that goal for us, because ultimately we want to be able to have a consistent pipeline of homes that weren't just purchased in one portfolio one time as a one-off, but a consistent pipeline of those portfolios, or waterway for those portfolios, to be able to grow the portfolio of shared equity and community-owned real estate at that organizational level. But in order to do that, we need scale and consistency, and so that's sort of the arc that we're thinking about in terms of our success.
Yeah, ditto on like the removing from the speculative market, huge check mark on that. I think all three of us there, and then the scale piece as well. On the scale piece, I think for us, our fund is targeting specific regions in the country, right? So we're looking at the South, the Southwest, the Midwest, some of the most traditionally underserved areas, and I think our fund in relationship to the policy work that our members are doing on the ground, um, probably can begin to create, alternatives that we see a little bit more commonly on the coast, which again are not to scale either, but Los Angeles with ULA, with the mansion tax, has been able to create a fund in order to like promote social housing, right? Like, can we begin to see that a little bit in some of the most underserved regions, and can our fund create opportunities and leverage, you know, the opportunities to even play around with like different alternatives. Right now, our main thing is cooperatives and community land trusts, but are there other things there that we can begin to create? And in order to be able to do that, again, right, we need that patient capital to allow our folks to really get creative and play around with different structures. Again, structures that meet their needs, right? Again, it's about impact. I think, the problem with the traditional affordable housing, that 0 to 30% is always a struggle to get to, right? I think that is some of the gaps that like someone like our funds like ours try to meet, right? And getting creative and being able to do that. So, but we need the time, and we need the cheap capital to be able to do that as well, right? In order for our folks to not feel strained and constrained. And over the next couple of years, can we build out that ecosystem in these regions? I think would be wonderful to see.
Awesome. Thanks all. Seeing some questions come into the chat. So I think what we should do is, open it up now to everyone. Feel free to drop any ideas or questions in the chat. I want to start with this one that James just dropped, because actually that was one of my questions that I had, as part of this panel, if we had more time for it, which is around managing the tension of generating wealth for the fund, for beneficiaries, future generations, through price appreciation, and then maintaining affordability for future tenants and owners. When we're talking about this housing context, I know this is a very live question, and folks come at it differently. So I'm just curious to hear like your quick thoughts, each of you, on that question.
Yeah, great question, James. So I think a lot about this question. I sort of come to solutions by getting my hands dirty and figuring it out. And I think that's the way it is here at ICS, which is to say, at Rock USA, we incorporated an association of the co-ops we serve who elect community leaders to the Rock USA board. And that, oops, the screen is changing.
We're opening it up to everyone here. So
oh, very good. Okay.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
apologies.
10 we're in the round.
Gotcha, with you. Sort of baked the values of the organization into the legal structure of the organization. I didn't know how to achieve that out of the gates at ICS. So I'm here managing the operation until we figure out how do we institutionalize the values and codify something to this question, right? How do we balance the interest of the parties at the table? But we absolutely want low and moderate income homeowners and their wealth building opportunity front and center in that. But I don't know how to do it yet. So we're going to figure it out.
So my answer isn't wildly dissimilar. So I mean, for us, the way we think about it is if we're getting real estate without the need for heavy public subsidy into those shared equity organizations, that's our metric. Those are our wins, right? And so what we've done at the fund side is to build in some flexibility to say we have to return capital. We have an expectation of return on that capital, and we don't have full control over the market over that holding period. So how do we give ourselves some flexibility and lean into the fact that we do have portfolios of single family real estate, and so we have multiple sale options. So we really think about it in percentage terms to say how many homes, how many of that portfolio can we get into that shared equity organization, and how many do we need to sell either at fee simple in that 80 to 120 range to just low income homeowners that be fee simple, and how many might need to be sold to market in order to preserve some portion of those that are hitting the affordability targets and staying in those shared equity organizations. And so it really is, because we have that flexibility within the portfolio, it isn't necessarily sort of how do we kind of find that middle ground on that one sale. It's sort of how many of those are we able to get into those shared equity organizations, knowing that that's our sort of managed to metric in terms of how successful we are in the mission side of the fund.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to figure it out in real time. Like, I think it's live. Our fund, we're just wrapping up our first phase now. We got 2 years under our belt with 2 deals and a potential third coming down the waterway soon. And I think that the way that we're looking at it is in terms of like, can we connect our members with capital that will ensure that the project is sustainable in the long run, while creating the least amount of burden to the residents of those buildings that are trying to take control and autonomy over that building, right? So it doesn't make sense to give them a loan that's gonna at the end of the day be extractive and put them in a worse position or in a dire position later on, right? We're trying to be in this current moment in time calculating as best as we possibly can we match it with what we have available? Can we match the need of the project, right? And if we cannot do that, then we have to figure something out and we have to go outside of our network to be able to provide that, right? But I think that that's where like um our intervention and our commitment to try to figure out areas and pockets where we can access, again, that 0 to 3% or that 3 to 5% in terms of like interest on capital to be able to give our members. It's kind of like part of the math that we're an equation that we're trying to like fit in even before we commit to anything with our members, you know, um, and trying to wrap up those deals.
Yeah, and on this question, I would also just note like the high level of experimentation right now, trying to balance these two pieces. And as I mentioned earlier, I think a piece when it comes to like balancing price appreciation versus maintaining affordability, there's so much wealth being extracted through the traditional real estate markets that looking at it from a community perspective, you hear this term community wealth building a lot. These models that take properties off the market, whether or not they have ownership or community investment opportunities, are keeping wealth in the community to a really measurable and meaningful way. And I think that's often overlooked. And at the same time, having opportunities for communities to say invest in the project, whether it's a housing building, whether it's their own apartment, they have kind of like an equity program, or it could be a commercial real estate property. This is what the Community Investment Trust is doing, where communities can invest $10, $20, $100, and that asset really actually grows over time. There's different ways to combine these pieces, and you see models like the Guild in Atlanta that is trying to balance this, these two pieces very explicitly. And there might be some trade-off, but I think there's some creative structuring to be done that actually gives you a little bit of both. So I'm seeing some strategies here. Grace, I think your question is kind of getting to what my piece, what I was just saying. But does anyone have a comment on this? Just like distinguishing between individual and community wealth?
I mean, the way that I really think about that is kind of the in between, I guess, which is really that wealth building infrastructure. So what is it? Because So what we're trying to do is embed in places the ability for individuals to continue to have an affordable ownership opportunity. And so that means it ends up being multiple individuals in a place over time. That feels an awful lot like community to me, but it's not necessarily broadly participatory in the way like a CIT or something might be, where you have kind of a micro share program. So it really is kind of finding the in-between path.
Rock USA practices a limited equity cooperative model wherein individuals own their homes outright and sell their homes into the market, generally speaking, at fair market value. That's where they build their wealth. The land is actually preserved long term, and there's no windfall profit for the sale of the land possible, which is why over 40 years we've not had co-ops selling their properties and pocketing individual members pocketing large sums of cash or proceeds. These are secure community assets and wealth building on the home ownership side.
Yeah, so I see two kind of related questions here around, barriers or threats to the work right now from Erwin and Margot. Do you feel like your organizations have had to adapt strategies with potential risk from federal funding or just the climate right now around, this kind of impact work?
Well, I mean, I think on the I mean, we had the benefit that we weren't plugged into the federal, funding sphere in the first place. So we didn't lose in that, like us directly in terms of like us getting, any type of resources from the federal government. But it has shifted the way that we're looking at our strategy, just not even on just like the capital fund, but just like our strategy in general, and banking on the organizing that again needs to happen at the local and the municipal level. And can we move at the regional level, I'm sorry, and can we move states and can we move local policy again to create the types of like fund um, or programs that, whether or not it's through capital directly or through access to, city owned properties, right? Can you give us access to either one in order for us to be able to create a safety net that then either our funds and other investors can come in again on the cheaper side with the flexibility side in order to be able to make these projects pencil out in the long run. Again, a lot of these projects are dilapidated projects that require a ton of rehab, right? And we're trying to create living conditions for people to live decently, right? That's the other piece of the equation as well. It's not only the acquisition, it's the rehab work, and then it's the transition of that too, right? Like, yo, the transition between like, folks being like, yo, the landlord, right? Like the roof is leaking. We got to call the landlord, to them being like, who's gonna fix the roof? It's y'all. Y'all control it. Like that transition, like those things are. It takes time, right? Which is another important thing in terms of like the equation. Sorry, that's a tangent, but it's related to like how we're banking on city and regional municipalities to step in where like the federal might have at some point in the past.
Yeah, thanks, Fer. Just want to flag we're entering the bonus 15 minutes. We're gonna keep jamming on these questions because there's still some more in the chat. Yeah, if you want to keep hanging out, we're just gonna do this for a few more minutes. I would love to hear Paul and Devin's take on that on that question and how you're adapting to the current moment, or if there are other kind of main challenges that you're trying to face right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple that are sort of surrounding this. We did not have direct federal funding for this work or our work generally, so that wasn't like direct loss, but a lot of our members do. A lot of the folks that we're working with do, and so we're sort of trying to understand sort of what the impacts are on them, and then kind of what that indirect spillover will be, both for our work to support them, for the other resources that are in that ecosystem. I think we're getting a lot of folks that are excited to talk more about what it means to do something unsubsidized, recognizing that for a while we were making the argument that doing something unsubsidized is additive because the subsidy sources are already 2, 3, 5x oversubscribed, and so we're taking a systems view. That's the way we're thinking about it. And now folks are looking at the inverse and saying, well, if those subsidies are going to start to dwindle for a handful of reasons, what does it mean to do that? And what is the messaging, particularly to local investors, about how they need to step up for their communities if they want to preserve certain types of ownership opportunities. So there's been some kind of a messaging piece to that too. And then, I'd be remiss if I didn't say there's also just like a certain amount of like cognitive drain and fatigue that people are just like, dealing with a lot more complexity of the things that we're describing. Is much harder to wade through than it was, last fall. And so I think there's folks are just kind of going through a lot right now. And so we're trying to make sure that we're kind of moving our work forward and doing the things that we can do, but recognizing kind of where everybody is. And that's across the spectrum, right? It's investor partners, it's local partners, it's our team, it's everybody.
Thoroughly agree with Devin's both points. Yeah, I'm very interested in what we can do without public subsidy to secure more properties, bring more housing to the market that's affordable. And so that's where we're focused at ICS.
Yeah, this is a question that, on every panel, every webinar right now, it feels like has to be asked. And I'm encouraged by, the very like forward thinking and like focus on, the communities that you're working with, and how, they're, the commitment on both sides, especially, Fernando, like you're as a, partner to these local organizations. I feel like, folks who are organizing capital right now have a real responsibility to, stand up for, what they believe in on this impact side. And we're seeing that in our community of investors, a lot of our folks here. But just like, for me, it just highlights the need to really double down on this kind of work, and how, in many ways, like focusing on this ownership piece is actually, maybe not going to be the target of attacks, right? Like, I think there's kind of this message and narrative that, is palatable to different sides. Taking a look at the chat here, but I also mentioned if you want to raise your hand, I can call on you and you can also pop off. I know it's just been a few of the same voices here, that you've been listening to for the past hour or so. Okay, Vanita, I'll come to you next, but actually, Carrie's question came in the chat that I think is really interesting. On self-directed IRAs or donor advised funds to move capital. Is that part of the, the fundraising that y'all have been doing?
Yes, great question, Carrie. And I think it's one of our opportunities and challenges is how do we get some of that idle DAF money into the community development writ large sector. And so our first deal was done with a senior subordinate debt package. And within the second mortgage, 3 DAFs participated in that highly subordinated debt. And they are game for going elsewhere with us, which is really great because I think we've got to figure out how to work with DAFs on a routine basis and get that money off of the sidelines.
Yeah, we've worked with a couple, literally 2, so we're working our way through the various platforms. We're finding that there's tons of potential when you've networked to one, you've networked to one, and it really is that there's the challenge is finding the ways to pull together a conversation of 30 or 50 of folks that are really that are serious about activating that. And we talk to the large platforms, we talk to the community foundations, and a lot of folks are really struggling to kind of get through to those folks to activate the DAF, even as DAF holders or even as DAF platforms, right? So I think that it's spot on. It's where there's a lot of idle money, and I think where there's a lot of promise. But I think it is a matter of just kind of continuing to stick with it and build build that network of folks that are really getting after it and getting serious.
I would like to say that I think the impact investing space and donor advised funds space, investment advisor space is way too self-focused and not investee focused. It is opaque, very difficult to interact with, and I agree with Devin. You've talked to one, you've talked to one. That is not an efficient marketplace. So more efficient channels to those resources would be greatly appreciated out here in the development space.
Yeah, Fernando, anything you want to add on the DAF question before I move on?
No, not on the DAF question, but I think there's a risk question there that's come up a few times in the chat that's super interesting. And I shared a resource from the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund that we're a part of, in terms of like how we're answering that question for folks to take a look at.
Yeah, that framework is really, really helpful for a lot of folks who are kind of new to this conversation too. So definitely check that out. Vanita, I'm going to call back on your raised hand. Do you want to ask a question?
Sure. Thanks, Transform Finance, for organizing this, and thanks for everybody's comments. I just have a question for Paul and Devin, and this was in the chat, but probably was missed. I'm just trying to understand, and I'm coming not from a capital background, so this may be a naive question, but just trying to understand, why would you want to uncouple the subsidy aspect from capital for measuring your success? Paul, as you framed it, I would think that we would need more subsidy indefinitely to scale such projects and investments and ideas. But maybe I'm missing what you were saying. So if you could clarify that, that would be helpful.
Happy to, Vanita, and I did see your question. I'm glad you raised it. Look, Rock USA is leveraging public and private philanthropic resources across the country to make resident ownership effective and affordable. I think that'll continue apace and grow under Emily's leadership. I just, to Devin's point earlier, historically you would talk about the subsidy pie as being fixed, and the competition among us all to move chips, chips around the board, but not actually grow the subsidy pie. Now I think we're going to see subsidy pie shrinking. So I think the pressure is even more on us to find unsubsidized ways of working. And this is just a market dynamic in our space and within our social enterprise that I think is a leverageable dynamic for the benefit of community. So that's where I'm zeroed in.
Got it.
But
Thanks.
the more the better. Makes life a lot easier for sure if there's more subsidy.
Yeah, agreed. I think my policy colleagues at GSN were, the first to show up to advocate for additional subsidies at any level. I think as a national organization, we have to think systemically, and it's very, very rare that someone says, "Hey, we have subsidy that's going unused in our market. Can we figure out a way to get more applications in?" It happens, but it's rare. And so our focus is, how do we do something that's additive systemically? That if we assume all that subsidy is already spoken for and sometimes has many multiples of the applications of the dollar amount available, how can we come in and add new units above and beyond that rather than competing with those applications? So that's sort of the way that we think about it in our focus. The other thing is that conveniently, it also is not a great fit for the way we're trying to do our work. So a lot of that pipeline is really set up to, you have site control, you have a specified gap, you have most of your other awards, you come in, you make application, it takes 6 to 9 months for you to get your funds right. And it doesn't work well for the single family acquisition space. So there's sort of 2 reasons why we're sort of uncoupling those. One is sort of an execution problem, and the other is just kind of an overall sort of scale of need.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a really really great question. Thanks, Vanita. So we have a few minutes left here. If anyone has any burning comments or questions, please, go ahead, raise your hand, and we can have you have the final word. But in the meantime, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's really a lot of conversation happening here, and this is a big topic, right? There's a lot of pieces within this field, and even calling it a field, we're talking about very different contexts. These funds are quite different once you get under the hood. And there are plenty of more folks who are doing deals and aggregating capital in the community-owned real estate space. So Transform Finance is working on kind of untangling some of these knots in the field. We're looking at projects, we're interviewing folks, we're trying to figure out what kind of capital is necessary and how to unlock that capital. We have several partners that we're doing some research on, and really excited to be working on this, particularly over the next year. So this will not be the last conversation that we're having on community-owned real estate. And hopefully there'll be a lot more opportunities to really dig into these tough questions. But I'm so glad that we got to kick off this series with Devin, Paul, and Fernando as real leaders in this space. Thinking about how are we doing real estate financing differently, and how are we creating our built environment, our homes, the way our land is organized differently. And there are lots of other folks on this call who I know are doing the same. David, I see you there. You've been active in the chat, developing some really, really awesome networks of community-owned hubs around the country. And there's just such an explosion of activity. So keep an eye out for more materials and opportunities to come into like a webinar format. We'll have potentially like some gatherings and writings as well to engage our community around this stuff. So with that, I don't see any hands raised. So I think we can let you guys go. But thank you so much for coming. This has been a really, really excellent conversation. We'll send out notes, follow-ups, recordings, hopefully later this week or next week. And yeah, please stay tuned for more on this. So thank you to our speakers, Devin, Paul, Fernando, especially.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great one.
All right,
Bye.
have a good one, y'all.